Peace everyone, Unmask Art here, and welcome to the first art critique of 2023. There is some fantastic work to look at today, so let's jump right into it. So first up we have this lovely pet portrait by Matthew. You can follow him on Instagram. You can see his tagline there. And he mentioned this was a commission piece, and there was a little bit of trickery with the reference photo. But overall, I think that he did a fantastic job. There's really great attention to the eyes brought into the portrait, which is really important. Nice textures on the nose, good composition. I like the way the fur sort of fades away down below the neckline and it just sort of like smoothly goes into the paper. So Matthew did a fantastic job here. Real quick, hello, Cherry, Claire, Linda, B, Diane, Chandri, Lisa. Good to see all of you lovely people. So there are a couple things that I think would have improved this portrait, and this is something that I've come across a lot in all of the in many of the animal portraits that I've critiqued over the years, and that is sort of this separation. It's kind of arbitrary, the separation between developing the light and then also the texture. And that can be really tricky anytime you're dealing with furry animals. We're going to be doing some furry animals this year in the art club as well. So make sure, if you're not an art club member, I'm not sure what you're doing this year, but I highly recommend it. We're going to be doing some animal portraits this year for sure. And so I'll talk more about this in those projects when they do come. But establishing the light before establishing the texture is something that a lot of people miss out on when they're doing the pet portraits. And even though this is a fantastic portrait, I think it still can be developed into establishing the light source a bit more. Because what ends up happening, and let me just point this out really quick. So we can see pretty clearly that the light is being established from this direction. And there's a bit of a rim light happening with this yellow fur. I perceive that, I don't have access to the reference photo, but I perceive that this yellow fur, this extra yellowness that's all sort of in this general area, a little bit on the eyebrows and whatnot, is supposed to be the color of the light. And Matthew, I don't know if you're in chat yet, but if you are, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong there. But the way that I perceive that color is sort of the sunlight shining on the face of the dog. It could also be artificial light, but regardless, it's a little bit too bold of a yellow without the payoff of the light. So the light source, if I were to establish this, and let me just grab sort of a dark brownish color here, I am going to first make this look really awful. So I'm going to color in sort of everything that's on the left side of the dog where the light source would not be hitting. So I'm just going to create this artificial shadow here on the left side of the dog. And then what I'll do is I'll sort of change this to maybe, let's go with a multiply, and then I'll just tone it down a little bit. So now I'm establishing the shadow side of the dog. And you notice the only thing that I did was just darken that whole side. I didn't worry about like texture or making the fur or anything like that. By establishing that hard shadow, not necessarily a real hard shadow, but a harder shadow than what was previously established. If you apply the fur texture on top of that instead, you can already start to see a dramatic difference in the three-dimensional quality of the drawing and also the establishment of the light source. So here's the before. Now, because I have been doing this for a very long time, I can identify what Matthew's plan was to establish the light source based off of some of the key markers. in particular that yellow light, and also the nose kind of gives away the light source as well, because he captured the light much better on the nose than he did the fur. And so by establishing that shadow, now the dog immediately looks much more three-dimensional. And sometimes the reference photo doesn't give you this. Sometimes when you look at the reference photo, because the way cameras work, especially since I know that this particular photo was taken on a cell phone, cameras, they do what's called metering. And what they try to do is they try to balance out the really bright parts of the photo and the really dark parts of the photo in order to capture as much detail as possible. And what that does to a photograph is it makes it a little flatter. It sort of brightens up the shadows and darkens the highlights a little bit so that it sort of captures every part of the image. It sort of helps prevent like really deep silhouetting with no detail. But I digress. Anyways, because of that, you sort of lose that information when you use reference photos. And so you have to add that back in by understanding how light works. Now, the flip side to the shadow, of course, is the highlight. So I'm going to take like a light tan color, and I'm just going to add this rim light to everywhere that orange sort of yellowish fur is on the dog that Matthew established. And maybe I'll even do a little bit on the ear here. And then let's just blur that so it's not so obvious. Maybe not blur it that much. Maybe, yeah, maybe about right there. And then what I'll do is I'll change that to soft light, or maybe, yeah, hard light. And I'll just tone it down a touch. And so what this does is it turns that yellow color of the fur into actual light, because the yellow is the transition between the really bright parts of the rim light from the light hitting the dog into the rest of the color of fur. It's that sort of translucent property of the hair, that subsurface scattering, where it brings out that really, really rich saturated color of the fur. And that's where you get that sort of bright yellowish orange color from the fur of this dog in particular. If you were to do like brown hair, sometimes you'll get like a really bright red color if it leans towards the red color. With blonde hair, you'll get yellows and you'll get oranges and gold colors. But with this fur, he established that sort of yellowish color as that translucent property of the fur. So here is, again, the before. It's still a very solid portrait, but you want to always make sure that you establish that light with the shapes. Focus on the big shapes first before you get too caught up in the details of the fur. That's going to make it look much more three-dimensional. And then also when it comes to the light, don't be afraid to go a little bit closer to that white. I didn't use a pure white here. It's still just a little bit brighter than the paper you're working on, but you can see just how much more life it gives the dog and how much more three-dimensional it makes the image look. Okay, moving on. Thank you so much for the submission, Matthew. Really appreciate that. Up next is Diane. Now, Diane, you're in chat, of course. This picture looks maybe like a little bit too dark. Perhaps I should have tried to correct the exposure just a touch. This looks a little bit more natural here. Maybe the picture was just a bit underexposed, and so it looked darker. To me, this looks a little bit better. This is probably closer to what it looks like in person, if I had to guess, because I don't think you use such dark colors here, and this just looks more natural anyway. So I'm gonna base my critique off of this, and this came out really, really well. Really sharp lines, really great softness in the sky. The mountains have a little bit of sort of oddity in texture right around this area here. Um, the mountains should stay soft. Like you stay nice and soft up here. Like there's a little bit of detail in the mountains, giving it, some flavor and some dimension, but it just looks oddly rough right in this area. Um, the water line here, this line is just a little bit too much of a line. You know what I mean? It's just a little bit too abnormal in the sense that it's like this real solid line. So I think it should be broken up just a bit, separating the mountains from the water. The texture on the trees looks fantastic. Now, one of the things that I was just mentioning with the pet portrait, that same idea also carries over to trees, believe it or not. And that thing, of course, is the the overall form of the tree of the plant. So if I take like this dark green and I'm just going to scribble over top of these trees where I'm going to establish the light more, right? I'm going to do it over here too. So what I'm doing, these trees are a little bit better on the left side, but still I think maybe a bit darker in some spots. Because what you want to do is you want to push the light to the side three-dimensionally where the light source is coming from. So I'll just multiply and turn that down a little bit. I won't make it too obvious. I'll just make it slightly more obvious. So something like that. You can see, especially this tree right over on the right side, how by darkening that left side, if you think of the foliage of the tree as a sphere, sort of think of shading it like a sphere as well. And then you can create gaps. You can create gaps where you need them, where you want some of the branches to be hitting the light. So you might have like some leaves out in front like that. So here's the difference, right? The difference is that shadow side feels like it's not being hit by the light, and that the highlighted side, the side that is being hit by the light, sort of, it creates that dimension. It creates that three-dimensional dimension. Whereas here it's just a little bit too flat, and that's one of the struggles with trees, and that's one of the struggle with animals that a lot of people have. Separating the texture from the form is one of the trickier things to do. Even I struggle with trees specifically, creating those three-dimensional looks. But overall, great texture in the grass, the bushes, and the foliage and all of that. Really nice, clean, super clean, actually, sharp lines on the church there. That it looks really, really good. A little bit of haloing, I think, just right around here. Perhaps it feels like it's a little bit brighter right around the steeple, but I'm nitpicking there. But otherwise, really, really good job. All right, up next is Lisa G. She submitted this project we did. I think we did this project last year. Did we do the Jaguar last year, or was it 2 years ago? I have the hardest time remembering. I think this was 2 years ago. So she definitely went back uh, and did one of the older projects, and I had to like double, triple take at this project because um, I was like, wait a minute, did she just copy and paste and then submit one of my own drawings to to the live critique? Because you did such a good job on this, and I can see that you used the same colors that I did, especially in the indicator lights and the subtle tone of the teal that I incorporated into the transition of the paint, just to complement that really bright, ridiculous orange in the lights. Yeah, October 2nd, 2021. Yeah, ugh, I can't believe it's been that long ago. It's wild. But yeah, after further inspection, I knew that Lisa didn't just copy and paste my own artwork. But goodness, you did such a good job. Very sharp, clean lines, nice, precise details in the rims of the car. Really, it's a fantastic job. The only critique that I'd say is that there's a few spots where I can tell you added a little bit more layer of your colored pencil. And because of that, some spots look really smooth and clean. And then the other areas just look a little bit grainy from the pencil. So a few examples of that, like if you look at this part of the tire in specific, particular, or this part of the tire, you can see between the transitions between the Payne's gray and the black really smooth. Like it's really, really smooth. You don't see any like cracks of the white paper showing through. Other areas like that, like the intake here, this tire, all of the really dark areas are really, really smooth looking. Whereas, oops, I didn't mean to draw on the actual, what is happening right now? Why can I not undo? There we go. That was weird. Sorry, my undo was not working, and I accidentally drew on the original. But anyways, the dark areas are super smooth, but if you look at like the center part of the car here, you can still see quite a bit of that grainy look from the colored pencils. Now, admittedly, this is very difficult to do. You can see if you look here, this is a bit smoother. This area is smoother than this area. And just by contrasting that texture, it sort of turns it more into a drawing. Whereas if you apply a little bit more layers to smooth that out, you could potentially do this with very small amount of solvent. I'm not sure if you blend with solvent or you or one of those people that avoid it. But by smoothing that out, you're going to see. I'm so confused as why my shortcut keys are not working. So you have to forgive me. Um, I've had this happen before, but I can't remember why it happens. I cannot remember why it happens, but it happens for some reason. Yeah, it happens for some reason. I don't know why. Anyways, but yeah, other than that, this is fantastic. Lisa also submitted this project here, which is the tea kettle. Same thing, like really good colors, really good like overall completion of this project, but you just want to extend those layers to the the lighter colors because if you look at the dark areas, you get them covered really, really well. But if you look here at like this lighter area, it's you're not quite covering the paper. Here is also a really good example. Right in this spot, you can still see some of that paper texture. So yeah, the lighter colors also need to be thoroughly applied. Let's see. What type of paper was this drawn on? This paper here, I'm not sure. Oh, Lisa answered it. The Strathmore Bristol paper. All right. Thank you so much, Lisa, for the submissions. Really appreciate that. Up next is Cindy. She did this colored pencil project. Was a tough subject. This was a tough subject, and it shows. Now there's a few things very specifically I want to talk about. You did a really good job on this portrait. Everything looks really good. The drawing accuracy looks pretty close. Yeah, it looks pretty close with the drawing accuracy. I'm going to sort of go through this section by section. I'm going to start off with the background. The background in the reference photo, there's nothing special, right? There's nothing in the background in the reference photo that is important to the composition overall. It's so it's blown out actually. So the camera is unable to capture what's behind the subject because the sky is so bright. And what you did in the artwork is you replaced the absence of the background with these sort of flowery trees. And the issue that comes with changing a background is how you do it, because there's not a lot to the background on your piece of paper. I would say, if I were to estimate, I'd say the background's about 8, maybe 10% of the artwork in general, just that area, just this small area here and this small area here. So because it's such a small portion of the artwork in general, you have to measure, okay, how important is that part of the artwork? And because it's right around like 10% or even less than 10% of the artwork, that gives you, if you remove the background, like if you were to grade this on a scale of 100 and you remove 10% of the image, you're still passing with an A, right? So the background isn't so important. It's not so important to the image. When you increase the details or the textures in the background, they compete with what's in the foreground. So by increasing the textures in the background, those textures are competing for the viewer's attention. I call this textural contrast. And there's 3 types of contrast. So pop quiz question, everybody should know this. If you've been in the art club for more than 6 months, then you should know the answer to this pop quiz question. The 3 types of contrast are, list the 3 types of contrast. But and I just gave you one. So the textural contrast here is the background is actively competing with the main subject of your artwork. And so what I would suggest removing at least some degree of the texture. So let's see here. I'm just going to blur, and I'm not going to blur it too much. I'm just going to blur it a little bit. You're still going to recognize it as sort of a flowery background. I'm going to blur it a little bit, and I'm also going to just lighten it a tiny bit. I'm just lighten it a little bit. So let's just bring that up just a tiny bit. So a little bit of a blur and a little bit of lightening, okay? And now I'm going to bring back the sharp image in the foreground, okay? So here's the new version. So here's the original with the background as sharp and as bright as you originally made it. Here's with just a touch of a blur and lightening in a little bit. So yes, that's the 3 types of contrast. You have value contrast, which is just, the difference between light and dark. You have saturational contrast, which is the difference between very low saturated colors and very highly saturated colors. So the difference between gray and like red or any other color. And then of course, texture contrast, which is how textured something is or how blurry something is versus how sharp and in focus something appears to be. And so in this case, by toning down a little bit of that, texture and saturation in the background, we can start to see the main subject sort of pulled forward, and the background no longer distracts the viewer as much as it did before. Now, the other thing that I wanted to talk about is the spaghetti hair. So, Cindy, you do suffer from spaghetti hair in this portrait. Fortunately, I have the cure to spaghetti hair, and I can't imagine Diane won't share the tutorial in chat because she's so good at doing that. But not too long ago, I made a hair tutorial to end all other hair tutorials. You won't need any other hair tutorial because I break it down the process to create hair step by step in the simplest, most digestible way possible. And it's very, very straightforward and easy. I would highly recommend you do that tutorial just so that you don't do spaghetti hair ever again. Now, as far as spaghetti hair goes, this is probably like the best version of the spaghetti hair that you could get because it's right on the edge. Like you're so close to bridging the gap between good hair and spaghetti hair that I was almost hesitant to even bring up spaghetti hair. Um, Thank you, Dale. Um, So the hair is really good. I also like what you did with the hair in the sense of color because in the reference photo, it's not very flattering. Thank you, Diane, for sharing that tutorial. And so I like the incorporation of the blue tones that transition from the highlights to the dark parts of the hair. Really, really good. The one thing you must be careful with is changing the hairline. So here's the hairline, and then here's the hairline that you drew. And we can see that these shapes are quite different. These shapes are quite different. You can see how her hair, now it's not a hard hairline. There's a lot of like sort of loose hairs that are coming down, but you can see how the hairline comes a lot closer to her eyebrow in the reference photo. And what you've accidentally done is you've sort of given her pretty big forehead in the drawing. So you have to be very, very careful with changing hairlines because hairlines are identifiable. It's a likeness kind of thing. So you're sort of changing her likeness by making her forehead feel much wider than it ought to be by changing the shape of the hairline. So just be careful with that. I like what you did with the eyes in your drawing. The eyes are much more appealing. The folds on this eyelid are a little off. These lines that you have drawn across the eyelid here are not anatomically correct. It should just be a line that comes out. Like if you look at this, this is sort of a straight line. This is a straight line. It's because she's looking down. You take a curve and you move it forward, it just becomes more of a straight line than an actual curve. So there you're sort of creating details the way you imagine the eyes to look, but that's not the way that the eyes look. And so you added those creases to the eyelid that shouldn't look like that. That just stands out to me because I know that that's not the way the eyelids look. Um, you did change the skin tone quite a bit, but I think you changed it more in a positive direction. The only downside to the way that you changed the skin tone is some places in the shadows. Now, one place that you change the skin tone that really take the quality of the work down in the face is right here around the nose. So you sort of gave her this really big looping nostril where that's not the shape of her nose. See, it's just a small crescent. It should just be a small crescent of that darker shadow, but the thing that it's not is a line. So it's you have more of a sharp line outlining that nostril which takes her nose and changes it into almost more cartoony. It sort of goes from a realism, like the eyes have a nice realism to it, but then the nose, as you sort of create this line that doesn't exist, it turns it more into a cartoon type of nose. And so you got to be extra careful with that. Instead, focus on the shape. So if I zoom in, I know that the reference photo is not super, super high quality, and that can make, creating a portrait that much more difficult. But if you look at the shape of her actual nostril, it's sort of a triangle, like an upside down triangle kind of thing with a subtle curve. And then the shadow of her nostril is sort of just like this shape. And here you have this really unique curve that comes around like this. So you're changing these really important shapes that determine the shape of her nose. So, and then of course for the nostril, you have this line that goes well beyond what it was supposed to go. So try to focus a little bit more on the shapes. If you establish those shapes, since it is a kind of a low quality photo and you're sort of making it more high quality with your artwork, focus on the most prominent shapes first, establish that in your artwork, and then very carefully develop them into the details that you're aiming for without too much change. In most cases, in most cases it changes by just not having the pixelization of the reference photo, and that's where a lot of the realism can sort of just develop by itself. So you just want to be extra extra careful with that. Noses are notoriously difficult on the face. They are notoriously difficult because the bridge of a nose isn't a line. It's just a separation of two different colors, but it's not a separation established by an obvious line. And that's where a lot of people struggle when it comes to faces, is not just the nose, but also the lips, because people have a tendency to outline the lips a bit too drastically. I like the change that you did with the lips. You gave them a little bit more of a red color, and that looks pretty good. Uh, and that's all I'm gonna discuss with this portrait. But it's a difficult subject, and you did a really good job. Just try to use those tips in the future, to improve. That's what I'm here for. That's why I do this. So, alrighty, moving on to Lisa G, but a different G than what was before. Um, there's like there's like 14 Lisas in the art club, and I guess it was just bound to happen eventually where two Lisas have a last name that starts with the same letter. And I didn't realize that when I was going through the artwork. I saw two Lisa G's, and so I was labeling it Lisa G to help distinguish or just differentiate them. And then I realized that there was a second Lisa G, and so this is Lisa G, but with a different G. All right. Okay. And she did this. This is water soluble oils, which I have absolutely zero experience with. So the other Lisa G, if you're in chat, you can, if you're in chat, you can maybe give me a little bit of idea of what the water soluble um, oils feels like, in comparison to, I don't know, acrylic or even just regular oils, because I personally don't know. Um, I really like the colors in this one. I like the composition. Uh, I'm going to touch back on saturational contrast and textural contrast a little bit in this project, just like I did in Cindy's portrait there. Because again, here we have a background where I'd say the background takes up about 45%. So the background's significantly more important in this project than Cindy's portrait, just because the overall it covers more space of the artwork. And so you have to ask yourself, okay, if the background takes up about 40 to 50% of the overall artwork, then you have to make very careful choices about what you do with the background. And in the case of this project, I would use the similar idea or the similar theme that I used in Cindy's project. If I just copy this, give it a little bit of a blur. Actually, I might even give it more of a blur than that, right? And then what I'll do is I'll just bring back the foreground here. So everything but the background will be in focus. And that will just push the background away further, right? And it will make the objects that feel important to the artwork, they'll just feel like they're in focus in comparison, right? So get this nice little butterfly. You really, really need to think of the background and the foreground and the middle ground as sort of separate entities. Also, the little spout here of the tea kettle thingy-mabob. Official name, by the way. That is the proper name for whatever this is. So by doing that, here's the original, and then here's by just pushing that background away a little bit, it just it feels like, the tea kettle, the onion, garlic, olives. I think those are olives. I don't know. It could be grapes, but they look more like olives. The tomatoes, the butterfly. You can just focus on those important features so much more when the background isn't fighting for attention. When you have all that texture in the background as well as the foreground, they're just fighting each other for attention, because when you look at it, the details in the background are capturing your attention, the colors and the textures in the foreground are capturing your attention, and you're sort of just looking all over the place. By pushing the background away, it's still important. Remember, it still is 50% of the artwork. And just because it's not in focus, just because it doesn't have texture, doesn't make it less important. It has that equal amount of importance, which is why the choices you make with the background are so vital. You don't want to create a background that diminishes the artwork. And so by sort of pushing it away a little bit, I didn't change the colors. I didn't even change the saturation. It's still a very bright green background. All I did was remove the texture so that texturally it's not competing with the foreground objects. And it just feels more inviting, and it's a little bit easier to focus on the butterfly, to focus on the really nice colors. By the way, fantastic colors in the tea kettle thing. I love the hints of the pink and the yellows and the blues and the greens. Just all of the colors happening there are really, really cool. I love that. And I like it even more now that I can focus on it without the background trying to take my attention away. So really, really good job on this, Lisa. You know which Lisa you are. I know there's like 5 people watching right now named Lisa. So if you didn't paint this, you're not the Lisa I'm talking about. All right, up next is Dale. Dale mentioned that this was the first colored pencil project that they done in 4 years, I think. Hopefully, I'm remembering that correctly, but it was like 4 some years ago. And Dale, you're on the right track for progression. Okay, you have a good drawing here. You have like a fun composition with the bird and the trees coming across. Actually, now that I think about this, this might be, I might have to change the color a little bit. Hold on a second. The color balance feels a little off. It feels a little yellow to me. That feels a little better. I think there needs to be some magenta in here. And Dale, did, yeah, I saw you in chat. So feel free to let me know if I'm heading in the right direction with the colors, because the color does feel maybe, maybe it's just more, maybe it's missing the magenta a little bit. The yellow is what's sort of giving me the cue that there might be um, a bit of a white balance issue here. Also, the tail looks a little blue. Maybe about right here. Yeah, I think that's probably, yeah, that has to be right because it was just looking a little bit too green. So I was just adjusting the white balance. So good composition. You have the shapes put in and all of that. Now what you need to do is you need to learn what to do with the shapes. Okay, and that's going to take some time. Uh, Same thing with the background that I've been sort of discussing in the last couple projects. The background here takes up 60%. Like the background's quite significant with this. And so you want to make good choices for the background. For a project, like this is rather, what's the word I'm looking for? Ambitious. This is a rather ambitious first colored pencil project in a long time because you did it on a pretty large piece of paper and you covered every bit of the paper, right? So, in the case of this project, what I think would have been a better choice is actually to just do the bird. Maybe on like this, that you have this tree branch and just the bird, right? And you don't worry about the background because you need to progress there. So try to find a little bit simpler. Blame your wife. That's always, that might not be the safe choice, but if you feel, if you're feeling brave, go ahead and, and blame your wife. I would never blame my wife for anything on camera. So I'll silently keep that to myself. Um, but yeah, so if Dale, you did sign up for the art club, I believe I saw your name. You can correct me if I'm wrong. If you're not signed up for the art club, then click the link in the description right now and do it. But there's a lot of relatively simple projects in for colored pencils specifically. If that's your goal, that's what you want to work on. But do the individual projects that don't have backgrounds and work your way up to some of the backgrounds so that you can learn some of the fundamentals with the colored pencils, and then you'll notice your progression coming really fast. Like the colored pencil project that we're working on right now, I don't recommend starting with that one. Okay, I would recommend maybe even doing the monthly masteries with colored pencils. That's going to be a really good way to establish just familiarizing yourself with how the medium feels. And you're going to, I would love to see you redraw this next year. Like if you do a few colored pencil projects throughout this year, I would love to see this artwork again a year later. So save the reference photo or something because I think this could be a really fun project for you to look back on and redo. Okie dokie. Up next, I have Cherry, and this was another example where when I looked at the artwork, I was like, wait a minute, Cherry, did you just copy and paste my artwork? Because you did such a good job on this tea kettle. I was just looking at it, I was like, goodness, like your artwork, Cherry, has come so far this past year. Like your progression has just been so so good. Also, Dale, if you ever have any questions, you're like working on a project or something, feel free to jump into the Discord and ask your question. You can post a like a work in progress picture and ask a question. And I'm in Discord like 24/7, so I try my best to always respond to questions and stuff when I get a moment to do that. Anyways, yeah, Cherry, you did amazing on this tea kettle. The colors are just honestly, I feel like the colors are better than mine. Like the reason that I knew that this wasn't my tea kettle that I drew is because I like your colors better. Specifically, this area right here is just it's so good. That little spot right there, I was like, yeah, that's how I knew it wasn't mine because that spot looked so good. Also, these little joints, look at the light. Like, look at the little shiny lights hitting those tiny rivets. Just so good. Just so ridiculously good. I love it. Like it, the only tiny complaint that I could possibly make is that the handle up here just looks like it needs another layer, really. Like it just looks a little too gray and it needs like a little bit deeper black. Like you have a nice deep black like right in here, but I feel like that deep black is sort of missing. But this could also just be a reflection from the light uh, via the photograph or whatever, right? So nothing too big there. But I'm nitpicking because this is so fantastically good. Cherry also submitted this the Swiss cabin church landscape. Beautiful sky, really soft colors. I love the transition, the hint of purple in the sky. The mountains look really good. The mountains do have quite a bit of extra texture to them, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. There is a little bit of haloing happening around the church, but it's subtle. I don't think a lot of people would notice it. And there's also a little bit of haloing happening around the trees, but again, it's kind of subtle. I don't think a lot of people would notice it. It's mostly noticeable like right here, I think. Like that subtle haloing right there around that tree branch, but it's yeah, just being a little nitpicky. Um, Excuse me, just like Diane's, this line is a little bit too. This line's just a little bit too much of a line, perhaps. Maybe again, I'm being a little nitpicky. I like the subtle wave textures in the water. Good light, like good light on the mountains. I think you have good highlighted shapes. I just feel like some of the shadow shapes are missing because I feel like this darkish color here, I feel like it needs to have like a stronger shape, right? Oops. I don't even know what that is. What is that? What did I just touch? I've never. What is that? How do I leave? I have no idea what I just did. How do I get rid of that? Oh, okay, that works. That was weird. I've never done that before in my life. Um, so the light shapes I think need to be complemented by some of these more solid shadow shapes, just to just like the Matthews dog portrait, by establishing some of these shadow shapes a little bit more prominently, maybe not this prominently, I'm just sort of giving you a quick example. It sort of helps define that three-dimensional shape of the mountain a little bit more. The grass looks amazing. The contrast on the church looks fantastic. It's very bold, and it pops off the paper very nicely. Like it looks really good. Great long shadows, natural looking shadows from the trees. It looks really good. Now, these trees look pretty good. The same sort of thing that I mentioned on Diane's is that creating the form of the trees, oh, it's so hard. I know maybe I think that after the portrait, the pastel portrait that we're working on, we're just gonna do some foliage. Like we're just going to create some foliage, and I'm going to sort of break down some simple ideas to help you think of foliage more three-dimensional and sort of creating those shadows, because this is a reoccurring theme that that everybody struggles with when it comes to doing trees or any foliage. The bushes, the shadows are established a bit better than the trees. Trees tend to have a bit more difficulty to them, but you sort of have these nice strong shadows that create that form of the bushes, but not so much the trees. These trees are not too bad, but I feel like this needs to be more of a shadow right in this area, and then also this like this part of the tree. This bush over here, this one's a little bit too repetitive in the sense that it doesn't quite have as much form as like your other trees. Even this tree, it's darker, it's further away, and it has a little bit more shadow going on it. But I feel like you need some larger shapes, right? A little bit of larger shapes to create the overall form uh the tree slash bush. I'm not even really sure whether it's a tree or a bush, but yeah. Aside from that, you did a fantastic job, and I've really enjoyed seeing your progression over the past year. Your artwork has just been fantastic. All right, up next is Linda. She also did the tea kettle. Beautiful colors. I like that you chose to do a background. Linda, I think I'm pretty sure it was you. I was reading. I think you commented on the post on Facebook in response to Diane, and you it was because you did monthly mastery 13. So you've already done monthly mastery 13. We're going to look at it here in a few minutes. But Diane said something like, wow, you're fast. And you said, well, I'm not working on any other projects, and I also don't have a life. And it made me laugh because I can totally relate to that. And so the fact that you did a background on a project where there was no background, just for the sake of putting in a background, you did some bokeh circles, which is fun. You did a complementary color in the background, which is also, a good idea. You added a little bit of like a table surface. You added like this drop shadow. That's not really a drop shadow. Like you started to add some stuff, but I can see the limitation a bit on your idea for, in particular, the drop shadow. So I'm not going to touch on that because it's rather complex. It's hard to describe drop shadows. But in the future, if you want to do a drop shadow, just stick with an oval, simple oval, and you'll be good to go. Actually, let me just, now that I brought it up, look, I'll just do an oval. So let me create an oval shape. I'm going to fill it in with like a dark purple just because. And then I'm going to blur it so it gives it some soft edges. Oops, I did this on the wrong layer. 1 second. There we go. Now I'm going to blur it. So let's give it like a nice blur about there. Let's just put it sort of in place right underneath the tea kettle. Maybe you push it here. It's a little bit wide, so let me just shorten that up. And now I'm just going to cut out the tea kettle here very roughly. Of course, I'm not going to leave it purple. Calm down, everyone. Let's just change the color. Maybe it's a little bit too purple, so let's like neutralize it a bit. And let's desaturate it. Yeah, that's dark enough, I think. And we'll just sort of like that. And that's just an oval. I would say close to 99% of cast shadows that you want to create, a simple oval will be enough to get the idea across. In your cast shadow, I can see that you wanted to establish the shape of the spout of the tea kettle. Totally unnecessary. There's no spout, and I think that that cast shadow gets the point across almost instantly, and it was nothing more than a just an oval. So stick to an oval next time, and I think you'll be more satisfied with the way that the cast shadow looks. Um, but the only other thing is, since uh, you have plenty of time, I want to see more layers. I want to see more layers in your artwork. Less colored pencil texture and smoother outcome from the colored pencils, since you have the time to add more layers as an admission of your own. So, all right, the next one that Linda did is the Swiss landscape. Once again, this one also looks a little dark. Let me just do the exposure touch up a little bit. This one, I think this is a probably just a hair closer to what the it looks like in person. Um, and Linda, you did this in also in colored pencils. Linda does all her projects in colored pencils, even the most difficult pastel projects, she still does them in colored pencils. And this one, this came out really good. The sky, I'm mostly impressed by how smooth the sky is. Really, really good. Yeah, yeah. The different papers, different textures. I totally understand. Um, you do really, really good on the pastel mat. You did this one on pastel mat, right? I think I read correctly that you did this one on pastel mat. Pastel mat might be your paper, Linda. Like it really might be, because every time you do one on pastel mat, because you cover the paper, it just looks smoother. Like, I know that this is colored pencils, and I'm 90% sure it's on pastel mat. The sky is buttery smooth here. Like, your sky looks really, really good, knowing that it's colored pencils. The highlights on the mountains are a little bit too dark. So if I take this image and I just make it black and white, you don't really see the effect of the light on the mountains. You see some shadows, but you don't quite get the light. So where the spots are orange here, those are obviously where the sun is hitting the edge of the mountains. So those areas just need to be lighter. And when I make it black and white, you can see that the value doesn't really change enough to establish those as light. Okay. And so you just need to go a little bit brighter there. Just be a bit more cautious of your values. Okay. Um, the foliage looks good. There's nice dark areas. Again, with the highlights, they need to be pushed just a little bit brighter, uh, because we see the cast shadows. Like, these really deep, dark cast shadows, they're super visible. That tells us the strength of the light. Because the cast shadows are hard and dark, we are, even if we don't understand it, we perceive the light as being bright and strong. And so that strong, bright light needs to show up somewhere. And where it needs to show up is in the highlights. And we sort of, right now, I feel like this has the middle tones and the shadows, but it's sort of missing that extra flavor of highlight. So if I'm just going to take like a color you have here. So the grass is rather bright. I'm just going to bump it up just a tiny bit. So I'm just gonna make it a little bit lighter. And I'm just gonna throw some spots on the bright side of everything. So this face here that is facing the light, I'm just gonna throw some spots here, maybe a couple there. I'm gonna do the top edges of the mountains, like where the highlights are supposed to be on the mountains, right? Just a couple of spots. Let's just soften the edges a little bit. Maybe not that much, maybe something like that, sure. Um, there is also a shadow that runs through here. I need to see it. Yeah, it's like sort of right there. This face, very important there. Um, and then let's just do, maybe do, let's do screen. I think screen looks the best. And I'm just going to just bump up the highlights a little bit. Maybe screen is not the right. Let me try lighten. Yeah, I think lighten's better. And then let me just change that color a bit. Go a little bit brighter. Yeah, something like that. So here, all I did was bump up like some of the surface areas throughout with a single color just to increase the brightness in some spots. I think the cabin itself is what benefits the most from the light. The mountains it doesn't really do a whole lot to, the trees it doesn't really do a whole lot to, but the cabin it sort of has that glowing sunset light now. And that's where you just need to push that highlight a little bit more, and I think you'll enjoy the results. The other thing that you did that's pretty obvious is that you changed the church into a cabin, which I think is great. I think that your cabin looks really good. The only downside is that this is not in perspective. So that shape is slightly skewed from the correct perspective. Let's see if I go back. Where am I at here? This is the cabin, I think. Yeah, so you can see how flat the roof is. And that's because the perspective of the image overall, it's really wide. So you might have thought that like these lines are all converging. They are to some degree, but they're converging way off the paper. They're converging so far off the paper that for all intents and purpose, these lines are almost just horizontal. That's how far off they are. Now, if you're changing, like if you're making the roof here taller and then it's sloping down, that's fine. But this is still perspective breaking here. So if you wanted the cabin to sort of have this look where you have the face of it, and then you have the roof coming out, and it's being this part of the roof is really tall hypothetically, and then it slopes down like this. You can do this, but there still needs to be the rule set. There still needs to be the rule set. So this is just a slanted roof, but yours breaks perspective, and perspective, it's tough. It's tough. The other small thing about this, when you changed the cabin, you changed the shape of the cast shadow. But the problem is you didn't change the shape of the cast shadow. Your cast shadow is the same shape as the church. The problem is that the church is not the same shape as your cabin. So you'd also have to reflect that change in the cast shadow, because you wouldn't have this part of the cast shadow anymore because you don't have the steeple. This long part of the shadow is the steeple from the light source coming down like that. So you also have to change the cast shadow a little bit. But you did, I mean, aside from those very particular things, you did a really good job on this project. And then Linda, you also did this portrait, very difficult portrait. Yeah, very difficult portrait. I snagged the reference photo from the Discord. You did, no joke. I was So I was setting up for the stream today. And so I was bringing all of the photos into Photoshop, as you clearly see. And so I just happened to have this drawing up. I didn't have the reference photo yet. I was getting the reference photo. My wife had just brought me tea, which I obviously finished. Um, but so I had your artwork up on in Photoshop here without the reference photo. My wife brought me tea and she looked at it and then she double took and she's like, "Oh, I thought that was a photo." She thought that your drawing was a photo. So pretty good compliment, um, unintentional compliment from my wife. And when I first saw it, when I looked at it like here, it was like this size. Why this size for me? I guess it depends on what size screen you're looking at. But for me, when it was smaller, um, I also thought it was the reference. I thought it was the reference at first. With the reference next to it, we can see the color of the bear has changed a bit. Um, it's a little bit lighter, which, that's not like an inherently bad thing, but the texture is amazing. Like the texture is so, so good. I would say of all of the artwork that I've seen from you, Linda, this one is probably one of the best when it comes to texture differences. Because the fur texture on like the head and the body arm of the bear versus the texture on like the snout nose thingy, that change is so well done. Like it's you can visually see the difference in the textures. It's supremely well done. It really is. Um, the one thing that I would have liked to see is you creating a bit more form. So just like Matthew's portrait, his pet portrait, if we if I just come in here and add, like, I'm going to add this shadow here, ignore the darkness of it for now, but if I come in here and I just start creating a bit more of these form shadows, so I'm going to bring this all the way here and curve it up like this. And I'll just add the shadow here. And then let's just go with multiply. So I'm just going to add this shadow, and then what I'll do is I'll create a gradient here. Right. Create a nice soft gradient to create the form a little bit more. By deepening those shadows just a little bit, you can start to see the roundness of the bear's form, of the head, of the snout thingy, just with a little bit of extra shadow there. Even if it doesn't exist in the reference photo. And I almost don't even like that I used like more of a blackish color. So let me find the right layer here. Not really changing anything in my, oh, there we go. I was trying to, yeah, I wanted to change the color, make it fit the bear. So here's like a brownish red, right? Here, yeah. Yeah, I think as the shadow, that looks better than just like the grayish color that I was using. So here's the before, here's the after, and it just creates a more volume of the bear. And it's just a small color change, or value change on those certain areas. And you don't even have to have the reference photo to do this. You're just using the light that you know is there, and you're making a very small, deliberate change. And that's just to create more spherical shape to your three-dimensional object. And the reference photo doesn't necessarily have that information because cameras aren't that good. Like cameras aren't really that great at doing that kind of thing because of that metering that cameras do. So you sort of have to know, and then think about it and then apply it to your artwork. That's there's those people that see artists doing like hyper realism and they're like, why waste all the time doing that? You can just take a picture of it. Artwork will always outperform a reference photo. It good artwork. People of various things, skills. There's some argument there, but artwork will always, always, always outperform a camera. Hands down, it will always outperform a camera when it's done at its at peak ability, because cameras are flawed inherently. They're not Cameras will never capture light as well as an artist does because they're limited in their capability. Um, I think the best proof of that is that photographers always have to edit their photos, and that's pretty much like digital painting. So, anyways, now the other thing that I wanted to mention was the shapes of the shadows that you used for. Is this your daughter? I think I remember you saying this was your daughter. I hope I'm correct there. Um, you have the shapes, and you did really, really well with the shapes. Uh, so you have these clear, distinct shapes of shadows that you established to help create the form, because this is a very difficult angle. Like it's hard to look this good with your face laying laid back like that, right? So it's tough. And so in the reference photo, I can see why is this not drawing on the reference photo? Oh, that's why. So on the reference photo, you can also see these shapes, and you copied those shapes really well over to your artwork. That's perfect. That's really good. The only spot that you got a little wrong, here's the eyebrow, and it comes down and it wraps around the nose. You squared her nose off a little bit too much. So you're changing the shape. Oh, you used posterization. Yeah, posterization is a really good way to help identify those shapes. Yeah. Um, you squared off the nose just a little bit in your artwork, and it's sort of changing the way the bridge of the nose is read. The other thing that's really difficult, I'll zoom into the reference photo really quick. The other difficult thing, now this comes back to the nose. So the nose, the tip of the nose is cradled like this on just about everybody with a normal-ish nose. Okay. I know normal is relative, but the tip of the nose always sort of has like this cup. It's sort of, and so this shape here is sort of rounded to create the tip of the nose, and so it's creates this triangle. It's this triangle shape. Like this is, say these are nostrils, right? And then the tip of the nose cuts through and it removes that part of the triangle. Okay, so that's sort of um, that's sort of what you want to think of it as. And so when you do that in your artwork, you lost the triangle a little bit. It's kind of small, I know, but I'm just pointing it out that those shapes are the ones that you sort of you got off of a little bit. You just The shapes are just off a little bit. Um, Other than that, I mean, you did you did a superb job on this project, you know. But okay, moving on to the monthly masteries. I have a lot to talk about on the monthly mastery, but I've tried not to talk for too long. Were there any questions? I hope that I didn't miss anybody's questions. I know that sometimes when I get talking, I'm just super focused, and anytime I'm working in Photoshop, I have a hard time going back to chat. So I hope that I didn't miss any questions. If I did, you're more than welcome to re-ask your question again and again and again and again until I do see it. So don't be shy. All right, so this is Cherry's monthly mastering, number 12. So for those of you that don't know what the monthly masteries are, because I'm sure there's a few of you at this point, um, every month I give you a reference photo, a rule set, and you follow the rule set to create the reference photo. Last year, all of the monthly masteries, so monthly mastery 1 through 12, were just monochromatic projects. This year we are working with color, so the projects are going to be simple, but they will progressively get more complex. And we're dealing with color with monthly mastery 13 and whatnot. This was by far the most difficult monthly mastery of last year. You know, it was monthly mastery 12, so you had the whole year of progression to get up to this point. This one's very tricky for a number of reasons. Not only is the subject matter quite complex in comparison to the other subjects that we dealt with last year, but also the lighting gets more complex as the objects get more complex. This one came out really good, Cherry. Again, I have to stress the importance of sharp lines. Maybe the photo's out of focus here, but the sharp, clean lines are one of the most important things. You want to practice control over your medium. So in this case, colored pencil. So you want to get the crispiest, like the sharpest lines, even if you don't get the values correct or the colors correct. Get correct what you can. So if you can get super sharp, crisp lines in a really accurate drawing, then get that first. And then worry about getting the values correct. Here, I'd say your values are very, very good. I don't see anything that sticks out to me that I would say is incorrect with capturing the proper values. All of the shadows look like shadows. All of the lights look like lights. I would just say that continue to push your ability to get sharp lines, to get smooth coverage of your colors, and you're just going to improve from there. So the drawing accuracy looks spot on. The values look really good. Um, it's just it's just getting those sharp lines. Oh, it's pastel pencils. Oh, okay, okay. No problem. No problems. Yes, unfortunately, it is too late to submit your artwork, as I'm already streaming. I don't. I collect all of the artwork about a half hour to an hour before the stream, and that's the cutoff essentially. Because if I can't keep adding it as I'm preparing, because then I would never stop. But anyways, yeah, just keep those things in mind. What you may try, Cherry, before I switch to the next monthly mastery, you could try to use masking film. If you're going to do it in pastels, you could cut out these shapes in masking film and then fill in the background, and then you have nice, smooth, solid background. But anyways, moving on to Diane. Diane, this one also looks a little dark. Let me correct the exposure. I think this looks a little better. That looks a little better. I think maybe the exposure was just dark. But yes, this is very, very good. This is colored pencil, right? Yeah, it has to be colored pencil because these numbers are Prismacolor. Yeah, very, very good coverage here. Great shadows. Really nice gradient on the cylinder. Some of the gradients on the figures, maybe just a touch, could be just a touch softer in some areas, like especially like her leg here. This line just feels a little hard, and it makes her leg look a little bit more like a rectangular prism as opposed to sort of a smoother surface. And this leg also looks a little rectangular. It sort of creates an edge there. Don't be afraid to expand the width of your gradient if it makes it look more cylindrical. Okay. So just be, never used masking film. Does it cut easy? Yes. Yes, it does cut easy. I think I mentioned this before. Any department store is going to have these cuticle scissors. These are just like really sharp, like extremely sharp, teeny tiny blades, scissors. The reason I like to use this to cut the masking film is because one, they're insanely sharp, and because the blades are really small, you can create or you can cut out the smallest of details. I prefer cutting it with this as opposed to using like a craft knife like this because I find this to be harder than this. But yeah, really good values. Really, I mean, just really good overall. Yeah, this was a tough one. The values and the shadows and the lights look really good here. It's just those gradients and a few spots I think would benefit from being a bit softer. All right, moving on to Lisa G. Oh no, which Lisa G is this? The Lisa G that drew this. You know which Lisa G you are. I think you're the first Lisa G, whereas Lisa G, but a different G, is a second Lisa G. So I think this is the Lisa G that has two L's in her last name, whereas the other Lisa G only has one L. I think, if I'm remembering correctly. Too many Lisas. It's you in chat. Okay, all right. Yeah, this one came out really well. Also, again, you want to focus on the separation of your shapes a bit more. Oh, hey there, Cece. Hope you're having fun in Disney World. Um, but yeah, just keep in mind like the sharp, clean edges. It's difficult. I know this year, probably I don't know, um, probably about halfway through the year, I will do the monthly mastery as a project. So we'll do a monthly mastery together. And I did this last year, I think, on like monthly mastery number 5 or 6 or something. I don't remember exactly, but we'll do a monthly mastery together later on this year as well, just to hit home these points of focusing on like the clean, sharp lines. And the shadows look a little off here. The shadows look a little flat in the change of the shadows. Like I see your zero value here. I don't really see a one value unless you like used the one value in the gaps here. But the zero and one value, the difference is kind of difficult for me to see. But one thing I know for sure on the guy, his right leg is darker than his left leg. And so it should be like a zero shadow into a one, and then his left leg has like a two shadow. So there's a little bit of distinction between how much light his left leg is getting versus how much his right leg is getting. And so you just want to be mindful of that and really have these separate distinguishable shadows from one another. That way you just get that wider range of contrast. And I see that you're using the 90% warm gray here. Don't be afraid to use black for your zero value. Like if it helps separate the values a little bit more clearly, don't be afraid of just using your black pencil and then using the 70% into the 50% for your other values. Um, let's see. Next is Linda. Linda has two monthly masteries here. This is a good, like this came out really really good here. Is this? Oh, okay, yeah. Prismacolors on pastel matte. I'm glad you labeled that because that's what I was thinking. Again, there's just some areas where the sharp lines would have a huge benefit. So if I like take this color here, if I take this color here, and I'm just going to go around the guy's head really quick. If I were to just sharpen up this line, even if it means covering up and making his head a tiny bit smaller, like it goes a really long way. It just goes a really long way of making the objects stand out more. Like they feel more in focus as opposed to slightly out of focus with the camera. Um, but yeah, so I just want to emphasize that one last time. I won't say it again. I promise. Just focus on the really fundamental things first before you get too caught up in the shadows and the values and the highlights and all of that stuff. The stuff that you want to learn to control the most is just control of the pencil. So creating those really sharp, clean lines, even at the expense of not getting the values perfectly correct. Because getting the values perfectly correct, it is important, but not at the expense of the control of the pencil. Yeah, masking tape could be a good idea. You can use whatever tool you want, whatever method you want to help establish the sharp, clean lines. It doesn't matter what method you use, but you want to learn a way of perfecting that. Like you want to master that aspect, because it will just take you so much further. Like think of it like think of it like doing a blurry background and then slowly transitioning into something that's more and more in focus. So sort of that shallow depth of field effect that we've used in artwork for many projects over the past few years now. That control of going from something that's super out of focus and then gradually moving to an object that is in focus, that level of control, it comes from being able to control the sharpness of your pencil or your paint or any medium that you're working with. So try to focus a little bit more on that. It sort of seems to be an overlying theme among everybody's monthly mastery. So just focus on those really basic fundamental things first before you get too caught up in like the color and the values and stuff like that. Alrighty. Now, the last one here, Linda did monthly mastery 13. So, like I mentioned before, the monthly masteries that we're going to be doing this year, we're going to be dealing with color. So, this is the first monthly mastery of the new year, number 13. And I played a little bit of a trick on you guys with the first monthly mastery because one, I was pretty sure nobody was going to get it correct anyway. Moving into color is substantially more complex than just dealing with values and shapes because that's what we dealt with all of last year. As we move into color, like color matching is a whole spectrum of complexity. So now we have to change gears, and there's a new rule set that you have to learn for these new monthly masteries. And I tried to break that down in the tutorial video that's attached to this monthly mastery. So the first thing, if you're not familiar with the new monthly masteries yet, is that for right now the shadows are without color. The shadows remain the values you establish with 0, 1, and 2. And I think what a few people may get kind of incorrect is that if you have a 0 value and you have a 1 value and you have a 2 value, then you have to use every single one of those values in the projects. Like they have to be distinct and they have to be, or they have to be, of course they have to be distinct, but they have to be used. So looking at this, am I zoomed in too much? Yeah, okay, I thought I was. So looking at this, we have the reference photo on the left side. I wanted to bring the reference photo in because I wanted to make this sort of as an addendum to the tutorial of this monthly mastery so that if you're working on it right now, you can do it correctly from this point forward, because I will give you, here's the cheat sheet. I'm going to give you the cheat sheet, okay? Let's say you establish your values. Okay, so let me just grab a black. Why can I not use a brush here? I don't know what's going on here. Okay, there we go. There's a brush. Sometimes the shortcut keys act weird for some reason. So let's say this is the 0 value. Here is the 1 value, and here is the 2 value. So there's the 3 distinct shadow values, okay? Looking at the reference photo, I'm going to tell you right now that this is the darkest shadow. Like this is pure black. This is really close. Like it's super close. So we have there's those 2 shadows. There's the 0 value for sure. Now we'll have a look at this one. How close is this? It's a little bit closer, but I think you can clearly make this your 2 value. That can be your 2 value. Now, all of what we've looked at so far, pretty much black and really close to gray, because the table's not super colorful. It's actually the tablecloth that I used to take this reference photo is actually gray, but I used yellow light to turn it brown. So this is obviously a light, so we won't talk about that just yet. But here we have this, and now we have the back of the cube. And because the paint, and I apologize for this, I put like 3 layers on the cube. I don't know why it dried like this. But the cube sort of, some of the dark parts of the paint, but think of it here, the more prominent areas, like the color's not drastically different, but this is a shadow, obviously. That's a shadow. This is a shadow. But this is green and this is blue. But in the shadows, we're not dealing with color yet. We're dealing with the value. And the trick that I played on all of you for this first monthly mastery is that the way I took this picture, every single one of you fell for the trick, and that is to think that this right here is the light. Every single person thought that this was a light, and they wanted to put blue here. But that's not a light, because I strategically placed the lamp that I'm using to light this behind the object. So the cube, this is all one shadow. This shape is all one shadow. That's the trick that I played on all of you. Every single person like almost immediately messaged me their outline. I think I had like 5 or 6 people message me on the first day within like the first 3 hours of posting this monthly mastery, where they incorrectly labeled that as a shadow. And it's because the light source is behind the object. And this is the backside of the cube. The light is hitting the face of the cube that you can't see. Every single person got that incorrect. But so that's a shadow, and it's the same shadow. The value is the same across this cube. It's the same. Linda here has a one value I perceive and her two value, but it's the same shadow, so it should be the same value. So these should be the same value. Now, if I turn this black and white, actually, let me just duplicate and then have a black and white one. If we look at this black and white, you can see that this is the same value here. So here and here. Like you see that line? Look at that line. It's indistinguishable. It's the same value. It's a shadow. It's a shadow, and it's the same value. So it should be the same value. What do we notice about when we turn this black and white? What do we notice about the background and the face of this cube or the rectangular prism? The rectangular prism is darker. You should be able to recognize that in color. Try your best not to cheat by turning it black and white first. Okay. Try to look at the image in color. Try to establish where your values are. And then if you're unsure, then you can turn the image black and white and reevaluate. But don't do that first, okay? Because if you're going to draw something from life, you can't, you can of course take a picture of it and turn it black and white and do all those steps, and that's fine. But you want to develop your eyesight better. And so you need to start being able to distinguish values so that when you're working with stuff that's in color, which is everything that you're going to see in real life, you can evaluate the values better. So you want to get better at this. And this is where it's going to get tricky since we're dealing with color. So just keep that in mind. So you could arguably use, let me just write this down for everybody. So let's go 0 value, 0 value, 1, 1. Let's have a look at the gray, the gray one again. Oh wait, why did I? No, turn gray. There. And we could argue that the cube is 2. If you want to use the 2 value for the cube, then I will accept the 2 value for the cube. But what I think you should do is 1, 1, 2. You can do that as well. Or you could just do 1, 1, 1, 1. Or you could do 2, 2, 2. I'll accept any variation of that. It's totally up to you. But for sure, that 0, 0, 1, and 1. No argument there. Yeah, no argument there. What you do with the cube, you have some leeway depending on how you want to move that shadow and change the overall value of the cube a little bit, depending on how different your 2 value is from your 1 value. But like I said, you could totally do just a 1 value and a 1 value on all of that if you want to. But for sure, you need to start with that, okay? Well, let me keep that. All right. Now that we've established that, let's have a look at Linda's monthly mastery that she did. When it comes to light, now we've dealt with the shadows. That's the way the shadows have to be. That's the way the shadows have to be. No color, okay? No color allowed in the shadows yet. When it comes to the light, your job is to match the color as close as possible. Now, the trick with the table is that if you capture the light here, then you get this color. I mean, I'll make that a little bit bigger. So if you capture the light there, you get this color, but if you do it here, you get this color. So which color do you use? Well, you can choose anywhere within this range. What I would recommend is choosing sort of the most dominant color space. So here we're transitioning into the shadow via a gradient. So arguably that's not really the dominant color, is it? Maybe this part right here where it's like the brightest, where the light is hitting the strongest, maybe you can think of that as being slightly closer to a highlight. And so you want to sort of measure like right around in the middle, right around in the middle, the most dominant color, sort of right in between these two, right? And so that's the most prominent color. So your goal needs to be this color as closely as you possibly can. Yours is very orange. Like there's a lot of orange going on here, Linda. And your goal is to match this color. So your table not so reflective of the reference photo. So try to be more precise with your color matching, because that's the exercise that we're starting with. The reason the shadows have no color in them is because now we are color matching. And if I make you color match the shadows and the lights, you're never going to finish the project and nobody's going to even come close, because color matching takes practice and it takes time. So we're starting off small here, so you're welcome. All right. So color match better for the table. Now this blue here, you got a little closer with the blue. Yours is lighter. Okay, yours is lighter and a little cooler, whereas the blue is a little bit warmer. You can sort of see the difference here. Now doing this color matching digitally is not, it's a little bit too precise to critique. But obviously with the table, there's no argument there. And then you have two lights on the rectangular prism. However, you don't have to do two distinguishable lights, okay? You can treat this as a highlight, because it is a highlight, first off. This is a highlight. This is the true color of green. So you could match this color here. You can match this color here and just put it on top. You don't have to do the highlight separately. You did really good with these colors. Like you matched them. Like look at the colors here. You matched them wonderfully. The thing that you really dropped the ball on though was that if I turn when we look at the black and white version, how is the light darker than the shadow? You see what you did there? Your shadow is way too bright because the color that you matched on the side, which by the way, you matched like perfectly. The colors on your rectangular prism, you matched like 98%. Okay. Like really, really well matched. So you did excellent there. The problem is your shadow. Your shadow doesn't make sense because it's lighter than the lights, right? So you have to be careful with that. Got to be careful with that. Yeah. Also, if you want, this is totally optional, so you can ignore this part if you want when it comes to the monthly mastery. Right now, we are not doing gradients. However, if you feel up to it, you can create a gradient here. You don't have to create a sharp edge distinguishing the background from the tabletop. If you want, you can, this line here, maybe not draw it so big. So this line separating the shadow background versus the light tabletop, you can create a gradient between these two. Now it still has to be a non-color shadow versus a color tabletop, but just like the reference photo where it gradiates in, if you want to create a gradient there just to make your monthly masteries look more artistic, feel free to do that. No, no points will be removed if you choose to do the gradient. Or if you don't want to do the gradient, that is also perfectly fine. Just so everyone's aware, next month's monthly mastery will have gradients. So they're coming. The gradients are happening. Actually, I might have to take that back. Actually, I'm not 100% sure. I think I didn't do a gradient, but I don't remember all of them. But for sure, gradients will be coming. Okay. How do you need to blend the colors? It depends on the medium that you're using. So glad you're doing this before you try it. Yeah. Um, I I knew that I was going to do this for the live stream today. So if you have any last questions, oh hey there, Matthew. By the way, sorry, missed you come in. Um, you want to ask the guy to give the portrait back so you can fix it? Nah, if the client loved it, no complaints, then don't convince him otherwise. Um, Anyways, yeah, like I said, if you have any questions before I go, because I'm going to wrap this stream up now because I'm 45 minutes over than what I expected to be. Uh, but I had a lot of fun looking through the artwork and, talking through this stuff. So I hope that you guys, for everybody that's pretty much been here for every single live critique, I hope that I'm still giving you information that you feel like you're learning because sometimes I can't escape the subtle feeling that I just repeat myself every time I do these live critiques. And I don't want it to feel I don't want it to feel repetitive for anybody. So I hope that I continuing to give you new information each time. Um, but that is going to do it for today. I will, of course, be back on Monday. We'll continue the pastel project. We got a lot of work to do on Monday. A lot of work to do on Tuesday too with the colored pencil project. So rest up this weekend. Don't work too hard on monthly mastery 13. But I do expect everybody to do monthly mastery 13 correct before the next live critique stream. So hopefully there's no more questions. If you have any questions, of course, just message me in Discord. I'm more than happy to tell you you're wrong and help put you back on the correct path. Um, okay. So, anyways, have a fantastic rest of your day. Have a wonderful weekend. I'll see you back on Monday. Take care. Peace.